Hello again. I was thinking the other day about the idea of refugees, what we used to mean by the term and the way that it is now understood. I spoke of this recently when I talked about the Belgian refugees who came to this country during the First World War and then, when it ended, promptly returned to their own country. This is what refugees were in those days. People who fled some temporary emergency and then returned to their own city or country when the crisis was over. You don't have to go back to 1914 though to see how refugees in Britain were seen as essentially transient, not permanent residents, but rather guests whom we put up for a while. I wonder how many older viewers will remember the volcanic eruption which took place on the island group of Tristan da Cunha at the end of 1961. Tristan da Cunha is one of the three tiny British possessions in the South Atlantic. St Helena is another, and so is Ascension Island. When the volcano erupted at Tristan da Cunha, all 264 inhabitants were evacuated, firstly to South Africa and then to this country. They were housed in an old army base, and very grateful they were too for this. There was no question of putting them up in hotels or giving them council houses. These people were refugees. They had come here temporarily until it was safe to return to their homes. 2 years later, the volcano had settled down, and so they all went back to their own country. 4 of the girls had married British men, but there was no question of using this as an excuse to stay in this country. Their husbands all went back to Tristan da Cunha with their wives. I give a link to a piece about this in the description to this video. You will sometimes hear it said that Britain has a history of offering refuge to people, and that is quite correct. The refuge was offered to the people of Tristan da Cunha, but neither they nor the British ever thought this was to be a permanent state of affairs. They were made very welcome, and everybody was kind to them, but it was never expected that they would be jumped up the waiting list for a council house or anything of that kind. This, then, is the difference between Britain offering shelter to refugees when I was younger and the situation as it now exists. The day before yesterday, Saturday, August the 13th, over 600 supposed refugees or asylum seekers arrived in this country from France. These people are very different from the refugees from Tristan da Cunha. For one thing, there are nearly 3 times as many of them, and in the second, they are not fleeing from any danger. They've been loafing around in France, waiting for a chance to slip into this country and be put up in a hotel before being allocated a council house. They have not the least desire to return to their own country, unless it is for a holiday once they've secured indefinite leave to remain. I invite anybody who accuses me of being hard-hearted or encouraging hatred of refugees and asylum seekers to say whether or not they really are unable to grasp the difference between the refugees from Tristan da Cunha and the 14 boatloads of refugees who fetched up in Kent a couple of days ago. Seriously? This, then, is the British tradition of offering shelter and refuge that left-wingers sometimes refer to, even though they have not the remotest idea of what they are actually talking about. I am all in favour of offering refuge to people in the way that we did the Belgian refugees in 1914 and the residents of Tristan da Cunha in 1961. What I am not in favour of is being taken for a mug and allowing many fit and healthy young men, who make up the great majority of these so-called refugees, to use up our social housing and then, when they are nicely settled, bring their wife and kids over to join them. This is a national scandal, and has nothing whatever to do with providing refuge, and everything to do with allowing ourselves to be taken for a ride by a lot of aggressive and unscrupulous foreigners.